Well, I just really love talking to certain entrepreneurs and leaders and continuing to stream stories of entrepreneurship and how people are managing to build and grow and transition their businesses in this economy. And every week, I think it's critical to check in with Mark Furman, director, shareholder of Tarlow Breed Hart and Rodgers, for a very important segment, Entrepreneurship and the Law. Welcome back, Mark.
Hi, Jeffrey. Great to see you.
You too, Mark.
I thought it would be worthwhile just having a little chat about something different than we typically talk about, but something that's been in the news. Question of the United States Supreme Court. There have been attempts and discussions about changing how things work at the Supreme Court, and just throw a few of things out there and maybe we can chat about it. President Biden has proposed 3 changes to the United States Supreme Court. One is term limits. The idea of this is there are 9 judges and there would be 18-year term limits on each Supreme Court justice, so that every 2 years a president would appoint a Supreme Court justice. And so there'd be no lifetime appointments. And there are term limits in many countries in courts, the highest courts in the country. But in the United States, Supreme Court justices serve for life unless they retire. And there have been some who have retired, Sandra Day O'Connor being an example of a justice who retired as her, I believe her spouse was ill. But we've also had some examples where Supreme Court justices have served to the very end. And when perhaps they were somewhat diminished from, when they were at their peak performance power. I recall as when I was young, Justice Douglas, who was on the court for many, many years, having to be carried in and out of the courtroom. So so I think it's something that's worthy of discussion. Of course, should every president have the power to appoint the same number of justices as every other president, or should we continue the current system where if there's a vacancy and the president appoints someone and has the votes in the Senate to get the nominee confirmed, then there's really no limit. In the case of President Trump, former President Trump, he had the opportunity to appoint 3 justices in the Supreme Court during his 4-year term, and that led to a significant ideological shift in the court. So it's just it's an interesting idea. It's worthy of discussion. The challenge is, the courts are designed as a co-equal branch of government. They're not controlled by the president, the executive branch, and they're not controlled by the Congress.
I'll add 2 comments. My assumption is that the majority of Supreme Court justices, when the country was created, didn't live over the age of 60, because that was life expectancy back then, or 65. And the other thing is, we're not a constitutional monarchy in which people are appointed for their lives. And I think, now that we're looking at people who could live literally into their late 80s and 90s and maybe longer as we continue to go in America, maybe putting somebody on the Supreme Court for 30, 40 years unchecked is not the way to go. The thing that makes this great country what it is, I think it's checks and balances, and it has to be at every level. That would be my answer to that. Everybody needs to be accountable. I'll say that as a management consultant. If I see leaders of small organizations, even family businesses, who run unchecked, it always leads to a problem. And I just think everybody needs to know there are rules and accountability.
So, with that thought in mind, Jeffrey, I'll turn to the second proposal, which is for there to be a binding code of conduct for Supreme Court justices. There is one for all other judges that are designed to avoid ethical problems, disclosure obligations regarding gifts, refraining from public political activity, and recusing themselves from cases in which they or their spouse may have a financial or other conflict of interest. But there is no enforceable binding code for the Supreme Court. And should there be? There's been disclosures in the press of some gifts or benefits to sitting justices on the Supreme Court, some of which were disclosed as a result of journalistic reporting. And so, I mean, do you think that's a good idea, Jeffrey? I mean, the backdrop, once again, our system of checks and balances is the judicial branch is a independent branch, not within the control of the executive branch or the legislative branch. And, you know, how would that work? And would it upset the checks and balances that are so important in our government, or would it increased accountability, actually enhance checks and balances?
It's the same argument I would make to a private company when they say, I don't need a board of directors or board of advisors. The statistics show that when there are, and you know this, a board of directors, board of advisors, when there are checks and balances over leadership tends to respond accordingly. And when you leave anybody unchecked, unmonitored, unaccountable, I think you're setting yourself up for a problem. And that includes, you know, legal standards that you have to follow or standards that I have to follow. I think it makes us all better when there are rules. Rules make us better. Or as I used to say in my earlier days when I used to work with, and I still do, female CEOs, boys need rules. Now it is more of a mix, but I used to say that. But it's true. Leaders need rules as much as employees. And leaders who have employees with no rules, they lose control of their organization. It's just the way it works. It's human nature.
So if we have time for
one more,
give
it to me.
So the United States Supreme Court issued a critically important decision this term on presidential immunity. Should presidents be absolutely immunized from any liability or criminal prosecution for acts that they take in while being president? This is a politically charged question, but trying to remove it from the current political situation in the country. Do you think, Jeffrey, that presidents should be entitled to immunity for their acts while in serving as president. And let me just to set the stage, if I could, for a minute. I think the argument for is president is dealing with the most important position in the country, if not the world, and needs to be free in making decisions from the threat of prosecutions. You know, there are countries where political opponents are prosecuted and go to jail or have to flee the country. So that's on one side of the ledger. On the other side of the ledger is should a president be able to order that his or her political opponent be assassinated? Should that be immune? And where is the line in between those two extremes? So I'll throw it back to you, Jeffrey.
Well, it's a power pack question. I don't know if I can be succinct enough, but limited liability would be my way of going. It wouldn't, again, I'll quote the parliamentary system of Britain, where you have these secrecy acts where for decades you can withhold information. I don't agree with that much withholding, but you can also, in a parliamentary system within a party, have a vote of non-confidence and lose your position and then be replaced by someone within your own party. I don't think we have enough checks and balances. I think we need more checks and balances from within the party, not to make it political necessarily that each party goes after each other's leader, but I think each party needs to be accountable for their own leadership. You know, if I'm looking at a big corporation, I expect a Fortune 500 company that the board of directors of that company and also the other shareholders will hold leadership accountable. And I do think that there needs to be a system of limited liability. We have to define it and make it balanced. But yes, I do believe in it. And I think, again, when you're looking at people of such strong self-esteem, some call them narcissists or crazy people who run for leadership, you need to make sure that they know that leadership does not mean I can do whatever I want. I have to act in the best interests of the country. And if I cross that line, that's different.
Well, it is an important issue and a very political issue in today's environment, certainly.
I'm a happily married man, and I have limited liability, and I know that. There's only so far I can go or I'm in big trouble. I believe that everybody performs better when we understand the expectations and know that we can only go so far. But people need to act in the best interests of the United States. And I understand there's probably a lot of things that go on that I will never know about in my life. And that's probably for the good, because I don't think the general public should be making those decisions. But it has to be in the best interests of the country.
So there's a lot to talk about around this issue, but one issue I'll just throw out is, well, who's going to decide? Is it left to a jury? Is it left to judges? Who decides where that line is in a limited liability context? So,
good question.
These are interesting questions. It's a little different than our usual fare on Radio Entrepreneurs, but
no, but it's about leadership in general.
I think they're pretty important issues.
I think most Americans would say that we need more representative government to us in this particular world. I've seen some of those surveys. You get it from both sides. They tend to blame the other side, but we all want some reform that makes government more representative of us again. And I think that's important. And some of that means checks and balances. Mark, if I think it's a great topic and it does relate to every corporation. And for those running corporations that are unchecked, I don't think they're doing the right job either. Mark, if someone's looking for you and wants to understand these issues better, how do they find you?
I can be most easily reached on my email, mfurman, Furman, at tbhr-law.com.
That's great, Mark. And it's great to see that you're still with us through the summer. We look forward to seeing you again on Radio Entrepreneurs.